Before every great journey, there is a night when the walls of your own home feel both too familiar and too small. I sat cross-legged on my bed, suitcase lying open in front of me like a mouth waiting to be filled, and I wondered, not for the first time, what exactly I was searching for by leaving. My room looked the same as always, the lamp glowing with its warm amber light, the books stacked unevenly on my desk, the faint scent of laundry still clinging to the air. But I knew that soon this stillness would be replaced with motion, airports, languages I could barely pronounce, and the shifting landscapes of a continent that had been whispering to me for years, Europe. The idea of going there had lived in me like a quiet flame, sometimes flickering so low I almost forgot it, sometimes burning bright enough to make me restless at night. Europe wasn't just a destination. It was a collection of dreams stitched together by stories I had gathered. A friend once told me about the night streets of Barcelona, where music drifts out of open doorways and strangers dance barefoot in the squares. I could almost hear it now, the strum of a guitar following me through the alleys. Paris, too, had been described to me in hushed tones. Not the tourist city of postcards, but the private Paris of balconies and cafes, of sitting with a glass of wine as the world softened around you. Italy came to me through laughter. A piazza at midnight where fountains sang louder than the church bells, and someone handed you a slice of pizza as if generosity itself were baked into the crust. And then there was Switzerland, spoken of with reverence, a country of trains that glide between mountains as if the world itself has slowed just to let you breathe in its beauty. Germany, with its stations that never sleep, its mixture of order and chaos, where midnight feels alive in a way I have never felt before. Poland, quieter, more familiar, its squares filled with candlelight and the smell of coffee, a gentle threshold between old Europe and something raw, closer to the bone. And finally, Ukraine. The name itself carried weight these days. I'd read the headlines, seen the images, but I knew headlines never told the whole story. I wanted to step onto its streets, to listen, to feel the heartbeat of a place where life was lived in defiance of war. My suitcase was still empty, but my mind was already full. I laid out clothes in small piles, trying to imagine myself in each country. A dress for Paris, a scarf for the winds in Krakow, a sturdy jacket for the chill of the Carpathians. Even my shoes seemed to hold questions. Would these sandals be enough for Spanish nights? Would these boots carry me across cobblestones that outlasted centuries? I stood and walked to the window, pressing my palm against the glass. The city outside looked ordinary, but I knew I was already leaving it behind. Every step I had taken here had prepared me for the ones I was about to take elsewhere. The fear of leaving was real, a tightness in my chest, a voice that whispered, "What if you get lost? What if you are lonely? What if you don't belong anywhere?" But stronger than that fear was the pull, the sense that I couldn't stay still anymore, that something waited for me beyond the ocean, beyond the safety of my routines. I turned back to the bed, to the waiting suitcase, and for the first time, I smiled. This wasn't just packing. This was creating a map of possibilities. A sweater might end up absorbing the smoke of a Parisian cafe. A notebook might hold words scribbled during a train ride through the Alps. A scarf might keep me warm during a night in Warsaw. Even the most ordinary objects were about to become keepsakes of something larger than me. I lay down beside the suitcase, listening to the quiet tick of the clock, and let my thoughts wander through the places that awaited me. Spain, France, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, Poland, Ukraine, each a story not yet written. And as I drifted toward sleep, I felt the weight of the world shift slightly, as though it too knew I was about to step into a different sky.
The suitcase gaped open like an impatient mouth, its dark lining daring me to decide who I was going to be for the weeks ahead. I stood over it with an armful of clothes and felt the weight of every choice. Packing is never just about shirts and shoes. It's about identity, the version of yourself you are choosing to carry forward. I began with the things I knew I couldn't live without. A pair of jeans, soft from years of wear. Sweaters that still held the faint scent of cedar from the drawer. A pair of shoes sturdy enough to carry me across cobblestones that had outlasted centuries. I folded them neatly, trying to imagine where they would go. Walking along the narrow streets of Spain, climbing the steps of a cathedral in France, standing at the edge of a fountain in Italy. Then came the what-ifs. Dresses for dinners I wasn't sure I'd attend, a scarf that might serve as a blanket during a long train ride through Switzerland, a notebook already half filled with words but too precious to leave behind. Its pages would soon hold sketches of strangers in German stations or thoughts scribbled under candlelight in a Polish square. I hesitated over a perfume bottle with only a few drops left. It was heavy, impractical, but when I held it close, it reminded me of evenings when I had felt bold, alive, unafraid. I tucked it carefully into a corner of the case. Every item seemed to whisper a memory. A jacket still carrying the salt of the sea air from a beach trip years ago. A pair of earrings I had bought during a festival, still glinting with the laughter of that night. Packing felt like a conversation between past and future, between the places I had been and the places I was about to touch. Soon, my apartment was a chaos of little piles. Shoes lined up like silent judges, books scattered across the desk, their spines begging to be opened on foreign trains. Lists scribbled on scraps of paper, circled and crossed out as my decisions shifted. I moved from pile to pile like a restless bird, second-guessing, rethinking. And yet, beneath the indecision, there was a pulse of excitement, steady and insistent. At one point, I sat back on the floor, leaning against the bed, and looked at the suitcase, half-filled, its zipper gaping like a smile. The room looked different already. Messier, yes, but also alive with the energy of departure. The walls seemed to lean closer, as though watching me prepare to break free of them. For the first time, I didn't feel trapped by their familiarity. I felt grateful. This room had kept me safe. Now it was letting me go. I stood and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet, shadows stretching along beneath the lamps. The bakery on the corner had gone dark, but I could almost smell its bread, as though memory itself were feeding me. A single car passed, headlights glancing across the building like a fleeting touch. Everything was the same, and yet I saw it differently. Each detail was a farewell, gentle but firm. When I finally zipped the suitcase closed, the sound was louder than I expected, final and undeniable. I pressed my palm against it, feeling the faint bulge of the things inside, and thought, this is my life now, compressed into a rectangle on wheels. And strangely, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like freedom. I brewed one last cup of tea and sat at the desk staring at the small stack of papers where I had scribbled plans. Flights, hostels, train schedules. But beneath the logistics was something larger. The certainty that these lists were not just tasks to complete. They were gateways. Tomorrow, this paper would turn into footsteps on streets I had only imagined. The tea grew cold as I traced circles on the rim of the mug. My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from anticipation. Everything was ready, not perfect, not complete, but enough. And sometimes enough is the best place to begin.
The night before a journey is never really night at all. It is a restless twilight stretched across hours, stitched together with half dreams and lists that repeat themselves in your head. I turned in my bed again and again, staring at the ceiling, then at the clock, then at the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains. My suitcase stood upright near the door, zipped tight, silent, but heavy with expectation. I told myself to sleep, but my mind refused. It insisted on wandering ahead of me, already boarding planes, already stepping onto foreign streets. Spain arrived first in my imagination. The night streets of Barcelona, alive with music. Strangers twirling in plazas, the scent of wine and grilled food in the air. I could almost feel the rhythm of it pulsing through the soles of my feet. That will be your first breath of Europe, I thought. And the idea thrilled me so much I sat up against the pillows, heart racing. Then France came, softer, quieter. I imagined myself leaning against a small balcony in Paris, glass of wine in hand, watching the rooftops stretch into the distance, the Eiffel Tower glowing faintly in the background, not as a tourist spectacle, but as a distant heartbeat of the city. I imagined a cafe where no one knew my name, where I could write in a corner while rain tapped against the glass. I smiled to myself in the dark, wondering how many people had dreamed of Paris this way, and whether the city ever grew tired of being everyone's fantasy. Italy followed, loud and golden. A piazza at midnight, fountains singing louder than the church bells. People sitting on the steps with gelato, with laughter, with stories. I saw myself there, not alone, but surrounded by a tide of voices, the warmth of strangers wrapping around me like a familiar song. Maybe Italy will teach me how to laugh louder, I thought, closing my eyes and picturing the light spilling across stone walls. Switzerland arrived next in calm silence. I saw a train cutting through mountains, its windows framing peaks that seemed to pierce the sky itself. I pictured myself sitting by the glass, notebook open, writing as the world rolled slowly by, each tunnel revealing another impossible view. In my mind, I breathed deeper, just imagining the crisp air, the serenity that would fill me if I let it. Then came Germany, not gentle, but alive with steel and rhythm. I thought of train stations that never slept, their vast halls echoing with footsteps, announcements, hurried conversations. Midnight in Berlin, perhaps, a mix of order and chaos, the sharp angles of modern life brushing against the weight of history. I could see myself sitting on a bench with a coffee, watching travelers move like constellations in constant motion. Poland entered quietly, like a whisper. Krakow, with its old square glowing by candlelight, with the sound of footsteps against cobblestones, with cafes that seemed to hold secrets in their walls. I imagined the calm, the gentleness, the sense of being both foreign and strangely at home. Maybe Poland will be the pause, the place where I breathe and gather myself before what waits next. And then Ukraine. The thought of it pulled me out of the dreamlike haze. The name carried a weight the others didn't. War, headlines, stories of resilience. I knew I wouldn't see the country the way I had imagined the others. There would be no easy fantasy, no postcard glow. But that was why I wanted to go, to see, to listen, to bear witness, to feel the strength of a place that kept moving, even when the world seemed determined to break it. My chest tightened at the thought, not from fear, but from reverence. This is where the journey will matter most, I told myself. I lay back down, pulling the blanket over me, though sleep still refused to come. My mind had already crossed oceans, already walked plazas, already stood at train windows. Tomorrow, I would only just be beginning. But tonight, I allowed myself to wander forward, to taste the anticipation. The suitcase by the door was more than a bag. It was a promise. And as the first light of dawn began to creep faintly across my ceiling, I whispered into the quiet, "I'm ready."
Morning spilled into my room long before I was ready for it. After the restless twilight of the night before, my body wanted nothing more than sleep, but my mind was already awake, stretching toward the horizon. I moved slowly, as though walking through honey, but there was no mistaking the shift in the air. This wasn't just another morning. It was the morning. The morning when everything familiar would be folded away and left behind. My suitcase waited by the door, zipped shut, its weight both reassuring and intimidating. I made myself a final cup of tea, sat cross-legged on the bed, and tried to memorize the room as it was. The books stacked unevenly, the sweater draped over the chair, the lamp glowing with its soft amber circle. I realized with a pang that the next time I saw these things, I would not be the same. That was the point, wasn't it? To step out of the circle of the known and see what waited beyond. That thought carried me back to the night's imaginings, to the way my mind had already flown ahead while my body tossed and turned under the blankets. One by one, the names of places surfaced like stars. Barcelona, Paris, Rome, Zurich, Krakow, Kiev. Each name carried its own gravity, its own promise. And now, as the first destination drew closer, my heart beat faster. I would leave through Spain. Whenever I pictured Europe, Spain always came first. A threshold, a beginning, a city that did not whisper, but shouted, "Welcome!" I could almost hear it already, the pulse of Barcelona at night, a rhythm that refused to let you stand still. I imagined myself stepping off the plane into the humid air, the city waiting like an old friend, eager to embrace me. In my mind's eye, I wandered narrow streets, lit by lanterns strung between balconies. Music spilled out of open doorways, not recorded, but alive. Guitars coaxed by hands that had played them since childhood. People clapped in time, stamping their feet on the cobblestones, and strangers pulled each other into the circle until no one was left outside. I could almost feel it, my own hesitation melting, my shoes abandoned on the warm stone, my laughter rising into the night. There would be food, of course. Plates of tapas balanced precariously on counters, passed from hand to hand. Glasses of deep red wine, cool and sweet on my tongue. The smell of spice and salt filling the air, mingling with the smoke of grilled meat and the citrus tang of oranges carried from the markets. The city, I imagined, would intoxicate me without needing to try. Beyond it all, the sea waited. I thought of walking along the shore at dawn, sandals in hand, the waves chasing my ankles. Behind me, the city would still be humming, cafes serving espresso to those who had not yet gone to bed. Ahead, the horizon would glow faintly, promising another day that belonged not to schedules or deadlines, but to the sheer act of being alive. But Spain, in my imaginings, was not only noise and color. It was also the hush of siesta, when shutters closed and the streets grew still under the heavy hand of the sun. I saw myself in a shaded cafe, sketching the curve of a cathedral in my notebook, sipping something cold, feeling the weight of time dissolve. To rest in Spain, I thought, would be as profound as dancing. Both were part of the rhythm of living fully. I rose and paced the room, my reflection catching me in the mirror by the door. My eyes were bright despite the fatigue, restless but determined. I traced the handle of the suitcase with my fingertips and smiled. Spain would overwhelm me, and that was exactly what I needed. To be shaken loose from routine, to be consumed by beauty and chaos until I remembered how to live loudly again. The taxi would be here soon. The airport, the boarding line, the humming engines, all of it waited just beyond this quiet room. And beyond them, Barcelona, a city of music and sea, of nights that blurred into mornings, of strangers who would teach me how to dance without asking who I was. I whispered into the silence, half to myself, half to the road ahead, "I'm ready."
Leaving Spain in my imagination felt like stepping from fire into candlelight. If Barcelona was chaos and rhythm, then Paris was intimacy and reflection. I pictured the transition clearly, the noise of the Spanish plazas fading behind me, replaced by the soft hush of Parisian streets at dusk, where every stone seemed to hold a secret,
and every balcony promised a private view of the world. France had always lived in me as a dream, shaped by other people's stories. Friends spoke of the Louvre, the Eiffel Tower, the Champs-Élysées, but those were postcards, glossy and distant. What I longed for was the Paris hidden between clichés, the Paris of quiet balconies, of half-finished glasses of wine, of cafes where strangers sat alone but never felt lonely. I imagined arriving on a rainy evening, the kind of soft rain that clings to your coat and leaves the air heavy with possibility. My suitcase wheels would rattle against the cobblestones as I searched for the small apartment I had rented, tucked away on a street where flowers spilled from window boxes and the smell of bread curled out from the corner bakery. I would climb the narrow staircase, my breath catching, not from exhaustion but anticipation, and throw open the shutters. There, across the rooftops, Paris would reveal itself, a patchwork of chimneys and lights glowing against the night sky. I would pour myself a glass of red wine, lean against the iron railing of the balcony, and simply watch. Below, couples would stroll arm in arm, umbrellas colliding playfully. A man would smoke outside the cafe on the corner, his face lit briefly by the flare of his lighter. Somewhere a violin might be playing, the notes wandering up through the rain, wrapping themselves around me like silk. And in that moment, I wouldn't need to speak or move or even write. It would be enough to breathe and belong, silently, to the city. The mornings, I imagined, would taste of coffee so strong it jolted me awake, paired with croissants that left flakes on my fingertips. I would sit by the cafe window, notebook open, sketching the blur of strangers hurrying past, students with heavy bags, businessmen glued to their phones, artists carrying rolled canvases under their arms. All of them pieces of a puzzle I would never complete, yet somehow they would feel like part of my own story. Paris, I thought, would teach me to slow down, to savor, to notice the way the light caught in puddles after rain, to linger in a museum not because I wanted to see everything, but because one painting refused to let me go. To take the long way home simply because the street was beautiful. There would be loneliness too, evenings when the rain wouldn't feel romantic, when the language would tangle on my tongue, when the weight of being a stranger would press against me. But even that, I believed, would carry its own kind of beauty. To sit alone on a balcony, the city stretched before me, and realize that solitude was not absence, but presence, of myself, of the world, of the quiet truths that only come when you stop running. As I closed my eyes in my room, preparing to leave, I could already see it. The shimmer of wet rooftops, the glow of lamps against stone, the glass in my hand catching the city's reflection. And I knew that Paris would not just be a place on my journey. It would be a pause, a mirror, a reminder that life is not only about motion, but about stillness, about the moments when you lean into a railing and finally allow yourself to simply exist.
If Paris was a whisper, then Italy, in my imagination, was a laugh. Loud, unrestrained, echoing through narrow streets and spilling into wide piazzas. Where France felt like a private conversation with the self, Italy felt like a stage thrown open to everyone, where life was meant to be lived publicly, generously, without restraint. I pictured Rome first, with its endless history stacked in layers, the Colosseum rising like a broken crown, fountains carved centuries ago still spilling water for strangers, ruins glowing in the late sun as if reminding me that even what crumbles can still radiate beauty. Florence called to me too, with its domes and bridges, its art waiting in hushed museums, and its markets buzzing with life. But wherever I landed, I knew the heart of Italy would beat strongest in its piazzas, those open squares that belong to everyone, day or night. In my mind, I entered a piazza at midnight. The stones underfoot were still warm from the day's heat, holding the memory of sunlight like skin holds touch. Fountains splashed silver arcs into the darkness, louder than the distant bells of churches that marked the passing hours. People gathered in clusters, their voices overlapping in a chorus of joy. Lovers leaned close on marble steps, hands entwined. Friends gestured wildly over half-eaten slices of pizza, laughter carrying above the crowd. Musicians tuned guitars or violins, sending their songs out into the night air like prayers. No one seemed tired. The city refused to sleep, and in that refusal, it promised me something I craved: permission to be boundless, to keep living long after the day was supposed to end. Food would be everywhere, I imagined. Not hidden in menus, but shouted from the soul. A steaming bowl of pasta handed to me with a wink by a waiter who seemed to understand that hunger is never just of the stomach. Gelato dripping too quickly down the cone as I tried to savor it, laughing as it melted onto my hand. Bread torn at the table, wine poured until the glass was full and then filled again before it could empty. Meals here would not be about nourishment alone. They would be about togetherness, about joy that insisted on being shared. Italy, I thought, would not let me remain an observer. In Paris, I could sit quietly on a balcony and watch. But in Italy, the city itself would tug at my sleeve and pull me into the circle. I saw myself clapping to music I didn't know, learning dances from strangers, answering questions in broken Italian mixed with smiles and gestures. Belonging here would not be given. It would be demanded. And in that demand, I would find a freedom I hadn't known I needed. By day, I would wander until my feet ached, through cathedrals where frescoes whispered from vaulted ceilings, across bridges where sunlight shattered on the water below, past ruins that hummed with the ghosts of emperors and poets. Around each corner, I imagined stumbling into something unexpected: a courtyard blooming with flowers, a tiny church where a single candle flickered in the dark, a bakery handing me bread still warm from the oven. Italy, I believed, would reward accidents more than plans. But it was the nights that stayed most vivid in my mind. The piazza at midnight would be my classroom, teaching me lessons I couldn't learn in books. That joy could be simple, that beauty didn't need perfection, that belonging could be found in a song sung badly but loudly, in a fountain step crowded with strangers who became companions for a few hours. To sit on those stones, my feet dangling, the air alive with laughter and music, that I thought would be Italy's gift. And perhaps, just perhaps, Italy would teach me how to laugh louder, how to stop apologizing for mistakes, how to embrace mess and imperfection, how to celebrate being alive, not in whispers, but in shouts that echoed into the night sky. Back in my room, I folded another layer of clothes into the suitcase, but in my mind, I was already in that piazza. I could taste pistachio gelato, sweet and cold. I could hear the clatter of plates in a trattoria where strangers squeezed onto long benches. I could feel the cool spray of a fountain against my skin. Italy was waiting, insistent and unstoppable, ready to shake me awake and remind me that life was meant to be lived out loud. And yet, even as I smiled at the imagined chaos, a part of me longed for balance, for stillness after laughter, for space after the crush of voices. I knew that joy needed its counterpart: silence, breath, perspective. That is when Switzerland appeared in my thoughts, like a calm hand placed gently on my shoulder. After Italy's laughter, I would need Switzerland's quiet. After the clamor of piazzas, the whisper of mountains.
After the imagined warmth of Italy, the echoing laughter and midnight piazzas,
the fountains spilling silver arcs into the dark, the plates clattering in crowded trattorias. My heart began to crave something different. I wanted balance, the counterpoint to noise and abundance. And that was when Switzerland appeared in my thoughts, calm and steady, like a cool hand resting against my racing pulse. Switzerland, in my imagination, was not a country you rushed through. It was one you entered slowly, the way you step into a cathedral or open a letter written long ago. I saw myself boarding a train with panoramic windows that seemed less like glass and more like invitations. The carriage would be quiet, filled with the soft murmur of travelers, the faint click of wheels against rails. I would sink into a seat by the window, notebook resting in my lap, and watch as the world outside rearranged itself into something impossibly vast. The first sights would be meadows, impossibly green, dotted with cows whose bells chimed faintly in the distance. Villages would nestle into valleys, their rooftops sharp as folded paper, smoke curling gently from chimneys. Then the lakes, still, reflective, holding the sky as if they were mirrors laid upon the earth. Their surfaces would ripple only when the wind brushed them or when a lone boat cut across their silence. And always, rising higher with every turn of the track, the mountains. Jagged, immense, their crowns buried in snow even when valleys bloomed with spring. I thought of the tunnels, too. Stretches of darkness that would swallow the train whole, only to spit it out again into blinding light. One moment, there would be nothing but shadow and steel. The next, a sweep of glaciers gleaming under a pale sky. It struck me how much life resembled this, moving blindly through darkness until suddenly the world opened up in brilliance. Switzerland would remind me of that truth, not with words, but with landscapes too enormous to deny. I imagined stepping off the train in a small town, the air so crisp it startled my lungs. The scent of pine, sharp and invigorating, would cling to my clothes. I would hear the steady trickle of a stream somewhere nearby, the rhythmic toll of a church bell marking an hour I had forgotten to keep track of. Time itself, I thought, might bend here. Not racing forward as in cities, but stretching, slowing, allowing me to breathe more deeply. There would be simple pleasures too. Hot chocolate thick enough to coat the spoon, sipped in a wooden chalet after a long walk through the snow. A bowl of fondue shared with strangers, laughter fogging the windows as the world outside grew white and silent. The warmth of wool gloves against my hands, the way silence could become a blanket rather than a void. Switzerland, I believed, would teach me that stillness was not emptiness. It was fullness of a different kind. Unlike Spain or Italy, this was not a country that demanded my participation with noise or motion. Switzerland would not tug at me or shout for my attention. It would simply exist, vast and quiet, waiting for me to notice. And in that noticing, I would soften. I would learn to listen, not to music or voices, but to the rhythm of my own breath, to the turning of the wheels beneath me, to the faint hush of snow falling somewhere beyond the glass. In my room, as I tucked another sweater into the suitcase, I smiled at the thought. Switzerland would not overwhelm me. It would steady me. It would remind me that beauty does not always need to perform. Sometimes it simply waits, patient and immovable, like a mountain. And yet, as comforting as that stillness seemed, I knew it would not last forever. My journey would carry me onward, and after Switzerland's calm, something restless awaited. I could almost hear it already, the echo of footsteps in cavernous stations, the clipped rhythm of announcements bouncing off glass ceilings, the blur of cities where past and present collided at every corner. Germany loomed on the horizon of my thoughts, louder, sharper, alive with midnight stations that pulsed like beating hearts. After the hush of Switzerland,
The mountains, the slow rhythm of trains, the silence that felt like prayer. My thoughts leapt forward into a different kind of night. Germany, in my imagination, was never still. It pulsed with footsteps, announcements, engines, with the restless energy of cities that carried both history and motion in their bones. If Switzerland was a cathedral of silence, then Germany was a station at midnight, alive with arrivals and departures, each one tugging the heart in a different direction. I saw myself in Berlin first, though Munich's grand plazas and Hamburg's harbors called too. But Berlin at night felt like the truest image. Vast glass ceilings stretching over a station lit by harsh, bright lamps, the boards flickering with names of cities, the mechanical clatter of departures and arrivals, voices echoing in German that I could only half understand but felt drawn to anyway. I would sit on a bench with my suitcase by my side, the smell of coffee rising from a paper cup in my hands, and watch as travelers streamed past like constellations. Some hurried, some lingered, some laughed, some cried. Each one a story, a universe, passing through for only a moment. Germany, I thought, would show me contrast. In the day, its streets carried history carved into stone, cathedrals that had stood for centuries, memorials that whispered of grief, walls that once divided and now stood as reminders. At night, though, the same streets came alive with neon signs, with music pulsing from underground clubs, with trams rattling past like veins of light. The city lived in two times at once, the weight of memory and the urgency of the present. To walk here would be to walk between eras, one foot in the past and the other already rushing forward. I imagined buying a ticket at random, the kind of boldness travel allows, a midnight train to Leipzig, to Dresden, to anywhere the rails would carry me. I would step onto the platform, the cold air biting, the locomotive breathing smoke like a dragon, and I would feel again that sharp thrill of movement. Life in Germany, I believed, was never meant to stand still. It insisted on motion, on progress, even when shadows lingered at its edges. There would be other moments too, softer ones. Sitting in a quiet beer garden under strings of lights, the clink of glasses and low murmur of conversation blending into a comfort I hadn't expected. Wandering through Christmas markets where the air smelled of mulled wine and roasted chestnuts, snow catching in my hair while lanterns glowed like small suns. Germany was not only about speed, it also carried warmth, tucked into its corners, waiting for those who slowed down long enough to find it. But the stations, always the stations, felt like its heart, a place where strangers gathered, intersected, and then vanished into separate lives. I could see myself lingering there long after my train had left, simply to watch the rhythm unfold, the way lovers embraced too quickly before the whistle blew, the way families clustered, carrying bags and hope in equal measure, the way a solitary traveler, perhaps someone like me, leaned against their suitcase and let the world pass in currents around them. Germany, I thought, would not cradle me like Switzerland or charm me like Italy. It would challenge me. It would ask me to move, to confront, to keep pace. It would remind me that life is both departure and arrival, that we are always standing in stations, waiting for trains we cannot fully predict. As I folded another pair of shoes into my bag, I felt the echo of those imagined footsteps in my chest, the sound of announcements, the hiss of doors, the clatter of wheels pulling away, and I whispered to myself that I was ready to enter the motion, ready to feel the pulse of a country that never truly sleeps. After the restless hum of Germany, my imagination longed for something gentler. I wanted to step out of the glass and steel of stations, away from the neon signs and endless motion, and find myself in a place that moved at a slower rhythm. That is how Poland appeared in my thoughts. Not as spectacle, not as noise, but as warmth. A pause. A square glowing with candlelight, streets paved with cobblestones, the kind of city where every corner whispered, "Stay a little longer." I pictured Krakow first, its old town wrapped like a jewel in walls that had seen centuries. In my mind, I entered Rynek Główny, the great market square, one of the largest in Europe, yet it didn't feel vast or intimidating. It felt human, shaped by light and voices. At dusk, lanterns would be lit, their glow stretching across the stones. Cafes would open their doors, spilling the smell of coffee and cakes, their windows fogging against the chill of evening. Musicians would gather at the edges, violins or accordions filling the air with songs both sorrowful and joyful, the kind of music that carried the weight of history but still made your feet want to move. I imagine sitting at one of those outdoor tables, a blanket draped over my shoulders, a steaming mug of hot chocolate cupped in my hands. Around me, people would laugh softly, couples leaning close, families lingering even as the night deepened. The air would be filled with Polish words I didn't yet understand, but I would hear the warmth in them, the way they curved gently when spoken among friends. In that moment, I would not feel like a foreigner. I would feel folded into the square, as if it had always been waiting for me to arrive. There would be churches, too, their towers rising above the rooftops. St. Mary's Basilica, I thought, would call out with its trumpet every hour, a melody cut short to honor a legend from centuries ago. The sound would drift across the square, reminding me that history is not locked in books. It breathes, it calls, it insists on being remembered. And yet, the city would not be heavy with it. Krakow, in my imagination, carried its past like a shawl, worn, cherished, but never dragging. I thought of mornings, too, waking to the smell of fresh bread, wandering through narrow streets where sunlight touched the pastel-colored walls, watching pigeons scatter as children ran across the stones. Maybe I would step into a small bookshop, the kind that smelled of paper and ink, or into a cafe where the barista, seeing me hesitate, would teach me the simplest words in Polish, laughing at my accent, but kindly. These were the kinds of moments I longed for. Small, human, unremarkable to anyone else, but unforgettable to me. After the speed of Germany, Poland would let me breathe. It would remind me that travel is not only about monuments or famous sites, but about the spaces where life lingers quietly. A grandmother selling flowers at the corner, a boy chasing his dog through the square, a candle flickering in the window of a chapel where someone prayed silently. These details, I thought, would stay with me longer than any guidebook memory. And perhaps that was Poland's gift in my imagination. Gentleness after intensity, rest after motion. To sit in a square as old as time, sipping something warm, listening to music rise into the night, and to feel for just a while that I had come home to a place I had never been before. After the imagined calm of Poland, my thoughts turned east, and the air grew heavier. Ukraine appeared not in the soft glow of cafes or the easy hum of market squares, but in flashes of resilience, in the stories I had read, and the faces I had seen on the news. It was not a country I could picture only in postcards. It was a place living through history as I breathed, carrying both beauty and struggle in every street. Still, when I closed my eyes, I could see it. Lviv at dusk, its cobblestones shining faintly after rain, the smell of coffee drifting from cafes that never seemed to close. The architecture whispered of centuries past, of Austro-Hungarian elegance, of Polish echoes, of Ukrainian pride etched into every brick. I imagined stepping into one of those legendary coffee houses, the windows fogged, candles burning on every table, not for romance, but because electricity had been cut again. People would be gathered in coats and scarves, their hands wrapped around warm mugs, their voices low but steady. The cafe would not be silent, it would hum with determination. Even in darkness, life refused to pause. In my imagination, someone might smile at me as I entered, a stranger, but not unwelcome. They would gesture for me to sit, to share the heat of the candles. Conversation would ripple around me, plans for tomorrow, jokes to lighten the mood, Stories whispered of family members far away. Perhaps there would be laughter, surprising in its brightness, proof that even under the weight of war, joy still found its way into the cracks. I thought of Kyiv, too, the wide streets, the golden domes, the metro tunnels deep enough to shelter thousands. I pictured myself descending those endless escalators, the air cool and damp, the station walls echoing with footsteps. People would sit on benches underground, waiting not for trains, but for the air raid sirens to fade. Children playing with toys in corners, volunteers handing out blankets, students scrawling on phones, their faces pale in the glow. Life reshaped itself there, but it did not stop. Above ground, the city would awaken again, traffic resuming, cafes opening, people walking quickly but with their heads high. Odessa drifted into my mind too, the sea rolling endlessly, the Potemkin stairs leading down to the port, the air filled with salt and gull cries. War might shadow it, but the Black Sea would keep breathing, eternal, a reminder that no storm lasts forever. I could see myself standing there, coat pulled tight, watching the waves crash and recede, hearing the stubborn heartbeat of a city that had endured everything. Ukraine, I realized, would not welcome me with the same lightheartedness as Spain or the quiet charm of Poland. It would challenge me. It would ask me to look closely, to listen carefully, to bear witness. And in that challenge, it would offer something deeper than joy, perspective. I imagined myself writing by candlelight in that Lviv cafe, my notebook open, the shadows of flames dancing across the page. Around me, voices would continue, some tired, some hopeful, some strong. I would sip bitter coffee, its taste darker than what I knew, and I would think, this is what courage looks like. Not loud or cinematic, but ordinary and unyielding. People living, people insisting on being. And perhaps in that flickering light, I would feel something awaken in me too. A reminder that comfort is fragile, that peace is precious, that strength is often quiet. Ukraine, I thought, would stay with me long after I left, not as a place I had visited, but as a truth I had touched.
The suitcase by the door had transformed overnight. It was no longer a simple container of clothes and notebooks. It was a pulse, a steady drum that seemed to echo through the apartment with every glance I gave it. Each time I passed, I felt the air shift, heavy with departure, light with possibility. I had imagined this moment so many times that now, standing on the edge of it, I could hardly believe it was real. The morning sun slid across the floorboards, spilling light on familiar shapes. The chair where I had once draped coats carelessly. The bookshelf whose uneven towers of novels had kept me company through long nights. The lamp with its amber glow that had lit more pages than I could count. Each object held a story. Each corner whispered of the version of me that had lived here until today. I lingered at the door, hand pressed against the frame, and let the silence absorb my farewell. "I'll be back," I murmured, though even as I said it, I knew I would return changed. The taxi pulled up with a sharp honk, pulling me into motion. I wheeled the suitcase out, the zipper straining faintly, the wheels rattling over the pavement as if eager to begin. Through the window, the city scrolled by in frames I wanted to memorize. The bakery on the corner, dark now, but still carrying the memory of warm bread. The small park bench where I had sat with a notebook and coffee, dreaming of this very day. The corner shop where the owner always greeted me with a nod. To others, it was just another morning. For me, each sight was layered with farewell, stitched with both affection and relief. The airport swallowed me whole, just as I knew it would. The rolling thunder of suitcase wheels, the sharp calls of flight announcements, the scent of coffee and jet fuel merging into something uniquely its own. Lines of travelers stretched like rivers, each person carrying their own secret reasons for leaving. Some wore excitement on their faces,
others' exhaustion, a few the kind of quiet grief that told me they weren't running to something, but away from it. And in that current of humanity, I felt both anonymous and alive. I clutched my passport tighter than I needed to, fingertips tracing its edges like a talisman. At the gate, I sank into a chair near the wide window, the expanse of glass opening onto the tarmac. There it was, my plane, waiting, its nose pointed toward the horizon. The engines hummed faintly, a promise of movement, of distance, of sky. I pressed my palm against the cool surface of the window and felt a thrill ripple through me. And then, as if on cue, my mind replayed the reel of what lay ahead. Not just countries, not just names on a map, but vivid promises waiting to be lived. Spain, Barcelona's night streets alive with music, the strum of guitars rising against lantern-lit walls, strangers laughing and pulling me into dances until dawn blurred the edges of the sky. France, a Parisian balcony at dusk, wine warm in my hand, rain streaking across rooftops, the quiet hum of a city that always seemed to dream even while awake. Italy, midnight piazzas echoing with fountains, gelato dripping onto my fingers, the sound of violins tangled with laughter, joy so abundant it spilled without apology. Switzerland, trains gliding through mountains, tunnels that opened into blinding light, lakes holding the reflection of a sky so clear it stole the breath from your chest. Germany, vast stations alight at midnight, announcements cutting through glass halls, footsteps moving in constant rhythm, a country that insisted on motion and demanded you keep pace. Poland, Krakow Square glowing in candlelight, a violin crying into the night air, hot chocolate warming cold hands, a pause that reminded me home could be found in unfamiliar places. Ukraine, cafes lit only by candles, voices carrying strength against the dark, children laughing between sirens, resilience carved into every gesture, every word. Each vision felt less like imagination and more like inevitability, like threads of a tapestry already waiting for me to step into it. I whispered the names to myself like a litany, a prayer. Spain, France, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, Poland, Ukraine. They filled my chest until I thought I might burst. The boarding call cut through my thoughts, crisp and undeniable. Passengers rose, gathering their bags, the line forming in quiet choreography. My pulse prickened as I stood, the ticket heavy in my hand. Not just paper, a key, a promise, a doorway to the life I had been dreaming of. Walking down the jet bridge, the hum of engines grew louder, vibrating through the floor into my bones. I glanced once more through the glass, the wings stretched wide, glistening with morning light. A machine, yes, but also a vessel of transformation. I laid my palm against the cool surface of the window and whispered, "Take me there." When the engines roared and the ground fell away, my breath caught in my throat. The city shrank beneath me, its streets narrowing into veins of light, its buildings flattening into patterns. My world became smaller with every second, and yet my life felt larger than it had in years. Ahead of me stretched the ocean, endless and blue, and beyond it, Europe. As clouds swallowed the plane, I closed my eyes and let the motion carry me. The journey had already begun, but the stories were still waiting to be written. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready.